Hello and welcome to the 22nd episode of the KurosawaCast. As ever, I'm Rob Beams, joined by Craig Ennis. Hello, Craig. How are you this morning?
I'm very good. Thank you very much for asking.
Excellent.
Feeling a little bit closer today. A little bit.
We are a bit zoomed in on the stream.
A bit more
indeed.
intense.
It is slightly intense. For those of you unfamiliar with the podcast, what we do here is we're watching the Kurosawa films in chronological order. We now only have 5 left to go, including Kagemusha, which we're talking about today. Kagemusha, his film from 1980, his third colour film, arguably his first epic in the kind of sense of the word I would think about it in. I guess you could call Seven Samurai an epic, but I kind of think of epics as being where they just throw everything on the screen in this kind of the biggest, most lavish way possible. And this certainly kind of fits the bill there. Your kind of prediction, as you, I didn't say actually for the podcast, I am the person who's seen the Kurosawa films. Craig is the one who's kind of new to all of them, watching them all for the first time. Your prediction last time around for Kagemusha was that it was going to be quite a violent, quite bloody film, which I don't think it necessarily is.
No.
What were your other sort of predictions on it? Was that basically...
That was it. I was expecting the epic, like as you know, as I said before, when we episodes and episodes ago when we were starting this, the idea was that, much to my shame, I hadn't seen anything, and I was only really aware of the biggies. I had heard of Kagemusha before, but my only real experience of it was to give the listeners some unnecessary backstory. I've been watching a lot of films on this thing called Box of Broadcasts, which is like a huge DVR of mainly the last 20 years, but it goes back further. It's an educational resource that institutions can sign up to, and you type in and you can find loads and loads of films and TV programs.
And basically, it's British television, isn't it?
Yeah. British television, recorded at the time. So I watched a film. I don't know what the film was that I watched, but it was from a 2007 recording off of Film 4, and they were doing a Kurosawa season, and I saw the trailer for Kagemusha. So I was expecting a big epic with battles and sweeping vistas and lots of historical context, and that's what it is, really, is it not?
It is, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. We'll get to it.
It's not really not necessarily where the story is as such, no. But that's certainly the setup. But then again, quite often the story isn't really in the big vistas and the big sweeping battles for a lot of those epic films anyway.
Although I would say, considering how many extras there are, how much armor, how many horses, and all of the pageantry around a lot of flags and all the pageantry around all of it, the battles tend to be, a lot of stuff still happens off camera, like actual fighting tends to be, you see people moving to places and then you see horrified reactions more than you kind of get any fighting necessarily happen.
It's like, to make a cultural reference from 5 years ago, it's a lot of it's like the 8th episode, at the end of the 8th episode of Game of Thrones. You see people mobilizing for the big battle, but they save that for the 9th episode.
That always used to piss me off in, do you remember HBO's Rome? Back in the early, it was like a BBC HBO co-production in like the early 2000s.
Vaguely, yeah.
There's like one episode of Rome where they're all geared up for some big fight with the Gauls or something, and I'm thinking, brilliant, we're going to see this big Roman battle. And then the next thing you see, I think at the beginning of the next episode, is them all kind of being like, "Oh lads, that was a hard battle." Obviously the budgetary constraints on that, but this is a little bit like that, but where they've clearly, it's not a budgetary issue, it's a choice, because everything's there to do it with. So basically this film, to go through briefly the plot, and there isn't too much of one really, is there? It's very simple.
No.
But the film opens on what apparently, according to the Donald Ritchie book, which is a resource I always go back to, it's apparently the longest static shot in any of Kurosawa's films. It's a 6-minute static shot it starts with of Tetsuya Nakadai, who was in High and Low, Yojimbo, Sanjuro. He is the lead role here, and he's playing this during the Warring States period, which is when Japan was, as suggests, it was divided up into all these different warring states who were all trying to get to Kyoto and take over the whole Japan and unite the country, basically. And Tetsuya Nakadai is playing one of these local kind of clan leaders, the rulers of one of these states. And he has a double sitting with him who's actually his brother, who often poses as his double to keep him safe and to, you know, whatever. And the film starts with them in the throne room, and there's another Tetsuya Nakadai because he plays a dual role. And the brother's basically saying, I found this bloke on death row who was about to be crucified, and he looks exactly like you, and I reckon we can use him as a double as well.
It's like the brother trying to get out of his job.
but then the brother continues to be the double for the rest of the guy's life, doesn't he? You don't see the Shadow Warrior again, as in, so the title Kagemusha means the Shadow Warrior. You don't see this shadow guy again until the guy's dead. And it's basically the whole plot can probably be boiled down into he kind of refuses the call, Joseph Campbell style. He doesn't want to be the guy's double. He kind of is won round to it by the idea of just the what he sees as this kind of earnest nobility and self-sacrifice and everything to do with this lord that he then wants to kind of live up to and help. So he goes along with it. He sees the horrors of war. He's kind of a man in the wrong place. But he gradually starts to feel like he is this bloke to the point where he gets very cocky and decides he's going to ride this guy's otherwise untamable horse. And the horse is like the only person who ultimately knows you're definitely not the bloke. There's a few people along the way who question if he's the actual lord. The grandson questions if he's the lord. The kind of the concubines or the mistresses, as they're called, they kind of question whether he's the lord. But it's the horse that absolutely knows that this guy's not the lord, and it chucks him off. And that kind of reveals that he's not the lord, and he gets cast out. And then the film's ending is basically that he goes and sees this climactic battle where the Lord's son, who's now kind of taken over, is going to basically doom the clan to death. He's going to take them on this folly battle that the old Lord would never have taken them on. And he goes and watches that from the reeds, horrified. Then he kind of runs and sacrifices himself, doesn't he? He kind of goes, well, I'm going to die. And in that moment, I suppose he has basically become the Lord. He goes and sacrifices himself. And then just as the Lord earlier in the film is sort of buried in a big urn in the middle of a lake, he goes to some water and he kind of goes and dies in the water. And that's the entire film, right? Like plot wise, there's not really anything other than that.
It's a lot of machinations, really, isn't it? You've got rival lords and the land and the power that they're fighting over. And a lot of people going, is it him? I don't think it is him. Oh, it must be him. I don't think it is him. If it is him, what would he do? Why is he doing that? That's not the sort of thing he'd do. Oh, that's definitely the sort of thing he'd do. Like, it's a lot of that kind of people kind of testing and prodding and never sure, like right from the off. So what happens is, I mean, it's kind of pointless having a double, to be honest, because they talk about sending the double off to the battles to keep him safe, and then early doors, there's a battle, there's a siege, and he goes, well, I'm going to go along to this one.
He wants to hear the flute, doesn't he? He's heard there's a lovely flute player at night, and he goes to hear the flute.
So they're laying a pretty successful siege on a castle, on a fort, but the people who are being sieged are like, oh, fuck you, we're still going to play the flute. They see this as a symbol of their resilience and resistance and the fact they're not going to be broken down easily. So the Lord goes, well, I'm going to go along and listen to this and see what the lay of the land is. And he's spotted by a sniper and taken out. So the whole kind of negates the point of having doubles in battle, really, from the start. I love the scene, though. Because there's a bit where he gets shot, but he gets shot at night, and there is this kind of quite a friendly sniper fella who's the one who shot him. Really kind of like smiley, little bit kind of tubby fella, and he takes the the rival lords to the spot where he shot from, and he goes through this whole business about how he lined his shot up using a weight and a plumb line, and he kind of like, and it reminded me of something from like a Tony Robinson show, like.
See what it reminded me, because I was going to say, like, that's one of my favorite scenes in the film, and it reminds me, within Kurosawa's own work, it reminds me of a lot of what happens in the second half of High and Low, where it's just really procedural. Like, to like a minute detail. So like a lot of other stuff in the film, we don't see the Lord get shot. We hear that it's happened, that he got shot that night, and we hear people going, like spies going, "Oh, did you hear? I think something's happened. I think he's injured," and all this. And it's only when we go to the daytime and we see this sniper and he starts giving the presentation basically about how he did it that we kind of see any of that side of it. And it's a really nice little scene.
It reminds me a lot of those kind of Reconstructionist history programs. A friend of mine used to make quite a lot of them, so I've seen quite a few. But it's that sort of thing where they rebuild something, because there's a bit at the end where he explains it, how he did it, and then as a demonstration, he kind of look away shoots this tree apart, as a demonstration of how he did it. And it reminds me of those sort of things where they rebuild weapons or test things using old technology, and then stand around a monitor with headphones on, going, "Whoa, it really worked."
It's almost a little bit Christopher Nolan in the sense that rather than just having this guy get shot by a sniper and the audience just being able to go, "Yeah, he got shot by a sniper," in case somebody's going, "But it was dark. How did that happen?" He's like, "Well, I'll tell you. It makes a lot of sense, actually. And I've got 5 minutes where I'm going to explain exactly how it happened. You see, he sized up the angle at night because he saw the chair." It's like this really like and I really like the scene, but it is this kind of over explanation of something you really don't need any explanation of. But it's just really nicely done.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I hadn't seen anything quite that. Well, you've seen things before in films like Mission Impossible or something where someone set up an automatic like sniper gun or something like that, and it's part of the, but it isn't. There's no dramatic momentum to our having this information. It's like, it's just
something that's already happened in the past. Yeah,
but I guess what it does do is, like, it's part of this. It's part of the investigation, isn't it? So it's all whether or not this guy's actually been shot and injured and killed. So it's people sort of reassessing the information they've got at hand to try and make an informed judgment, which ultimately no one can quite do throughout the whole thing, whether or not it's his enemies, whether or not it's his own staff, whether or not it's just the spies, whoever. They're all kind of umming and ahhing for most of the film. Is this the real Lord or not? And that's part of it, I guess, is to show the lengths that people are going to try and figure this out. And I don't know. It's strange that in a film with so many extras and so many wonderful scenes and colors and compositions, that's, for me, it's the bit that really stands out, is the guy with the plumb line.
Yeah, it's a really fun scene, and it is very kind of strange in its banality. It's strange in just how procedural it is in the middle of all of this stuff. Something I wanted to mention was that, like I said, the title means the Shadow Warrior, and I think when you hear that, you assume something cool. Like, the Shadow Warrior is an objectively cool name. And it's like you assume he's going to be, like Shadow Warrior. To me, the image is like some kind of ninja coming out of the shadows.
Yeah, to me, it sounds like an early 2000s PlayStation game. It's like Tenchi Stealth Assassins. It's that sort of thing.
Exactly. And actually, when you start watching the film, you quickly realize that the shadow aspect of him is more of a kind of metaphysical, like he's become just the shadow of this other man. He is a copy. It's like that that kind of picture, the painting of the pipe that says, "This is not a pipe." He is not the Lord. He's this pale imitation, this reflection of him. And the film is kind of about him trying to somehow actually embody this Lord when he actually is not. And you also get and it's not subtle, it's actually spoken, but the Lord's son who feels kind of slighted and snubbed and doesn't like having to go along with this ruse of this double being alive. I don't think I actually mentioned the synopsis. The Lord gets killed by the sniper, and then the reason they use the Shadow Warrior as the Lord for 3 years is the idea, is because the fact that the Lord wanted to make the rival kingdoms think he was still alive to keep everything sort of safe and secure. And and it's his son who resents having to play up to this ruse and having to pretend to call this double father. And the son actually says in one of the scenes about how he's still living in his father's shadow. So it's very pointedly, literally about this guy being the shadow of his father.
Well, there's lots of little bits as well, isn't it? There's who is the Shadow Warrior, and all that kind of stuff. Is it him? Is it his son? All that. But it's what was nice. I quite liked about it was just the level of the stakes and the kind of the sort of things it explores, what it means to live a double life as well. So there's some really nice business with the grandson, who is one of the first people to kind of say, "Oh, this isn't my grandfather. He's too nice." And then he has this really loving kind of tender relationship with the kid after that, and the kid's really fond of the imposter throughout the whole film. And then they go into all sorts of detail about like the mistresses, like, oh, you're going to have to be careful. They're going to notice you haven't got a scar. All the details about what he can and can't do as he's kind of taking on this role. There's some really nice stuff about power dynamics as well, where he has to hold a council meeting, and his advisor says, well, what you do is you shut up, just listen to everybody, and then agree with the consensus. You go, right, okay. So he just sits there looking thoughtful and then goes, yeah, I agree. And it says so much about like the nature of actual kind of power and decision making. All of that stuff I found much more interesting and engaging actually than quite a lot of the battle stuff and the kind of the getting ready. Although it is epic in scale and it looks fantastic. It is most interesting when people are play acting on screen, I think.
Yeah, there are some really lovely. The best thing went with all of the assembled troops and all the kind of pageantry stuff is there are some really nice compositions, as you said earlier, some really stunning shots where, for example, one of the first most notable ones is you've got some troops, I think, kind of sitting in the foreground or resting in the foreground, and then a huge procession of them going along the horizon, and there's a sunset filtering through them. There's one later on where there's like a rainbow across the top of the screen, and the sea, and people walking along by the sea. There's loads of things to do with, as you'd expect in Kurosawa, to do with weather and time of day, but just showing as well, like we've talked about with Dodeskadena with Dersu Uzala, how quickly Kurosawa has sort of embraced color and he's late to the party on color. I don't mean quick adopter. I just mean like he's having gone so long not doing it, going into it, he's then kind of gone really full on and really tried to use it to great potential. So everything in this film is so like color coded. The colors are so bright. There's, like I say, sunsets and rainbows. There's like a dream sequence in this that looks like something from Kobayashi's Kwaidan, where it's all like, I don't know, like pastel color backgrounds and colored sand on the floor and all this kind of strange stuff going on. Like he really throws it all against the wall in terms of his use of color, doesn't he?
Yeah, and the use of water to sort of reflect the ceiling paint, the background paintings back and stuff like that. It's quite something. This is going to sound really banal, but I kind of he uses color in a really interesting kind of vibrant, bright, unexpected way, but it is the way it's shot as well. It is a Kurosawa film in color. Like I recognize the composition and I recognize the staging and I recognize, like, if it was black and white and 20 years earlier, the way that the camera's used, it would fit it. You can see this being made 4 years after Seven Samurai, being in black and white, and it's still being looking much the same, but what it does is the use of color, the bright banners, the kind of the skies. There's a great scene where there's a battle at night and there's like phosphorus or something, different colored phosphorus is kind of lighting up the sky in purples and reds and stuff like that. It brings it to life and gives it a vibrancy that that is sort of, that I for one found quite unexpected from my kind of idea of what the color palette would be of watching all of this in black and white. You know, the different color kimonos and robes and things like that. It's all very, very bright and primary. There's scenes like I've got a copy of the film up and I'm just sort of scanning through it, but like the scene where we're just talking about where he's consulting the generals and the captains and whatnot. You look across the room and people are wearing green, yellow, red, blue, multicolored stripes. There's all sorts of it's just really, it really does just come to life in a big bad way. Yeah.
Not just to shit on Nolan for no reason for potentially the second time on this
please
podcast,
do.
But that is another thing that's interesting about this to me, is that you've got a director like Kurosawa who made things very austere and is very monochrome, you know, black and white. He switches to color and then he goes, okay, I'm really going to use color. I'm going to throw color at the wall. I'm going to use color in interesting ways. I'm going to use it really expressively. And then I think of like someone like Christopher Nolan, who ostensibly shoots in color, but his films in my mind are kind of just a slate gray.
Yeah.
Kind of like, and I think it just, the reason I bring this up rather than just to shit on Nolan is just how much of a visual storyteller Kurosawa is, I think, and how he does think so visually. I mean, one of the things I would have covered in one of the first episodes is that Kurosawa's training originally was to be a painter, and he was an apprentice painter who was going to kind of pursue that as a career early on in his life, and famously, I say, but it's that kind of famously of within circles of people that know about this film, he did very extensive storyboards for this film way before the film was even in production, which you can look up online very easily. They're all included in I watched it on the Criterion Blu-ray, where they've got a really nice slideshow that puts them side by side with the same bits in the film. They also reproduced them in the booklet there, and they show that the final look of the film, the final colors, the final compositions, even for really minute things, are all exactly as he planned them years before. Like, I'm increasingly one of those people that's a bit skeptical about auteur theory and just assigning the whole of this big collaborative production to this one person. But Kurosawa's storyboards for this film and the final film are so aligned, and he made them like, I think 3 or 4 years before the movie even started entering production. So it's quite incredible, and it really does show the what he was hoping to do with color, because these are really vibrant paintings as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really add much to that except to say I do miss the golden age of DVD extras where storyboard comparisons were pretty much standard. It's a lost art. But yeah, I can see that it is very. I can see that it's been very meticulously thought through as I watch it. Like I say, there's a real sort of signature staging, and kind of the scene where there's a few echoes and callbacks. There's a scene where spies are talking about the death of the possible death of the Lord, which really looks like Those Who Tread, you know, the main arena for that. There's a scene, the scene where after he's been banished and he's watching the battle through the reeds, looks a lot like the start of Seven Samurai, where they're kind of overhearing things, and there's just lots of really kind of, I don't know. It partly plays a little bit like Kurosawa greatest hits to a certain degree. I feel in terms of the staging and the cinematography and whatnot. The whole opening sequence going through all the there's a runner going through all the
running past all the troops as he goes to a castle.
which again looks a hell of a lot like Seven
Hidden
Samurai.
Fortress. Well, it's like, it looks like the steps in Hidden Fortress, doesn't it? That place.
And also, you know, the premise of the film as well, the kind of the secret identity thing is something that he's played with before with Hidden Fortress, and there was some other examples in my head.
I mean, Bad Sleep Well as well, arguably. Mifune's pretending to be sort of somebody he's not. There is something that comes up in his films. There's also
Mifune in Seven Samurai, of course.
Yeah, but there's also this. That's true as well. There's also a thing I think of Kurosawa's films of this idea of investigating nobility through the eyes of kind of lowly people, and then kind of wanting to emulate that, like criticizing it. Basically, it's exactly what happens in Seven Samurai, the character you just suggested, where the Mifune character says, "You samurai are all scumbags stealing from the farmers, you absolute shits," and he really wants to be one. And that's exactly what happens with this guy. Right at the beginning, he's saying to the Lord, quite rightly, like, I'm considered a criminal because I'm a petty thief and I stole a few coins. But you've stolen kingdoms and you've killed thousands, and but you're better than me, are you? But at the same time, he sees the nobility of this guy and he wants to emulate him in the end. And that's a kind of a queasy thing that I don't really quite know how to reconcile. It's kind of like Kurosawa goes towards criticism of the feudal kind of ruling classes, but then has this admiration for them that he can't detach from.
This goes to the point I wanted to make, because we've talked about how handsomely made this film is and how well put together and great performances and all that kind of stuff. Is that what you've just suggested? Is that why we're both a little lukewarm on it?
It's probably why I'm a bit lukewarm on it. Yeah, because he has all these scenes where I think when I was a younger man, I would have seen the scenes where the Nakadai character reacts horrified to war. And have just gone, wow, that's a powerful anti-war statement. And I think now I'm watching it kind of going, well, actually, yeah, he's horrified of everything, but ultimately he still wants to be this general, and he still thinks this lord is great, and he still wants to live up and sacrifices himself in the name of this guy's sort of honor to be more like him. So there's never really, there's the kind of frisson, like suggestion of critique, right? There's the merest suggestion. Yeah. Some kind of the humanity, the deep humanism, the anti-war message. But ultimately, the film is sort of like that lord, though. He was a really great one, wasn't he?
That's the thing, because ultimately it's another film about warring lords where I don't know who the goodies are. Like I don't really, a bit like the problem with Hidden Fortress, where you go, well, they're trying to preserve their fiefdom. Okay.
I think the thing with this...
Why do I want them to preserve it? Like, what makes them different from anybody else? Like,
well, the thing with this and with Hidden Fortress, and this more so, is that it is set during this kind of warring states period, which, if you're Japanese, that's just a period of history where there are no like good guys and bad guys. There's just loads of different lords who want to be the big lord, and they're all competing, and it's this big Game of Thrones, I guess, to kind of be the ruler in Kyoto, and you kind of grow up knowing about that period and that way of doing things. This is more so because it's set in a much more historical context where the three main lords in this are all real figures.
Yeah.
This Shinjin guy's a real figure. All his two big rivals are real figures. And in fact, in the same way that Kurosawa based Seven Samurai on an account he read that just basically said that some peasants hired some samurai once, and that sort of got him thinking about that. This was apparently kicked into life by the fact that he read that this particular lord, Shinjin, hired doubles, and he had some doubles. And so he started thinking about this whole concept of him having this double.
That's interesting, because it's got that vague historical basis in the same way that Macbeth does, in as much as there was a Macbeth, but the story's bullshit.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I guess ties in as well, because we know how much Kurosawa loves Shakespeare as well. And it is that kind of version of telling a historical story very much in the mold of Shakespeare, where, as you say, the actual details of it are complete bullshit. You're just kind of taking some familiar names and an interesting setting and some just tiny slithers of truth, and then telling whatever story you want to tell. And that's why it becomes interesting then that the story he wants to tell is almost always that the high, if we could take the high and low metaphor, that the people on high are more noble than the people who are on low, right? That is ultimately the message, right? Isn't it? And that's something that
it's kind of like the people on the lower strata of society are. It's like, they're not as bad as you think they are, but they probably should be in their place.
It is a bit like that. I think there is a lot to that, because he often has characters like in Fortress. He has the woman who the princess saves from is it prostitution or indentured slavery or something. She saves this woman, and that woman is shown then to be very loyal and to be a very good person. But there's never the suggestion that she should not be in her place as kind of, she's just a slave for a different person now, right? Like that's the movement that's happened. And I do think there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of kind of looking at this guy, and in the humanism of Kurosawa, to be generous, that is, I think, through the lens of seeing this criminal and then seeing that, he's seen as this lowly criminal, but look at him with the grandson. Look at the grandson noticing the humanity in him, the kindness in him. There is the potential that the brother sees in him to aspire to be the noble. And I guess the whole idea that this commoner could fool people into thinking he's the noble, maybe on some level that's even a critique of the system, because you're saying that, well, actually there's not a lot that separates being the poorest in society from being the richest. This guy could also be the noble, and by the end of it, arguably he has kind of become the noble, right? So I guess there is that to it, but it's just too weak, I think. I think it's just,
I mean, because the cynic can say is, don't shit on the commoners because they can be really useful to you.
Yeah, I suppose so. I think the thing that really kind of pissed me off slightly watching it this time was there's the bit where the Lord, he divides his army into along the lines of these Sun Tzu quotes that Kurosawa found that are about I don't know. It sounds like that song from Mulan. Be a man, you must be swift as a coursing river. That song. It's like all of the lines are like that, like fast as the wind and tranquil as the forest or whatever. They've got these kind of names for their different units, and this is how the army's organized. And each of these camps, there's the green one, the red one, and the blue one. They all have like a little leader of that particular camp. And there's a bit at the end of the film before this fatal final, I guess Macbeth style, like we know we're going to die, let's just go and give our best account sort of situation. They basically say to each other, yeah, this battle's really pointless, isn't it? And we're all going to die, and we're definitely going to die. Oh, well, let's go do it then. And the thing that annoyed me about that was that you're in isolation, in a complete vacuum. You can look at that and say, sure, there is this idea of these Japanese feudal codes, this Japanese idea of this nobility and this honor, and just kind of following you've sworn an oath and you're going to follow this guy. But Kurosawa lived through the Second World War. Kurosawa lived through a Japan that saw what mindless following of dictators get you to, what just fanatical devotion to bastards with terrible ideas takes you to. He lived through that. He saw it. He saw his country destroyed by it. So why is he then unproblematically making stories about these people just going, yeah, well, the Lord said so, and there's no real commentary on that, I don't think. We see the reflection in Nakadai's eyes just kind of going, oh, that's horrible. But I don't really think there's any, I don't know. To me, that's kind of weak.
Yeah, I don't want to draw any comparisons. I don't want to draw any comparisons with. Some comparisons are occurring, and I don't know if I should draw them or not. But there is definitely a thing in cinema where about lost causes, noble failures, wrong side of history, or whatever, where you've got stories about people who fought on the other side, on the side for noble reasons.
The Confederacy, there's loads of stories of that, and that kind of thing.
And always framed in a way, always framed in a way to show why people might get caught up and fight for something that and be on the wrong side of history. But it does feel like increasingly those things need they need a bit more explanation than just sort of like the idea that somebody's kind of misguided or something like that. This is a film from 40 years ago, so maybe
Yeah, but
maybe.
his earlier films were less, I think, conservative in this way. I think this is one of those ideas. Like, don't get me wrong, his films are quite conservative with a small c all the way through his career. I don't think he's as progressive or as humanistic as maybe I did before rewatching them on this particular run, actually. But like, in his earlier films, you get that real like social realism vibe where they're like Seven Samurai feels like Italian neorealism to some extent, like it's in that vein, and the ending of it and everything all does support this idea of this quite complex situation with the different classes negotiating it, and it's a kind of an unhappy ending, and it's a kind of a Pyrrhic victory that they kind of face, and there's some real emotion and also some commentary, and there's some interesting things going on in that. I think as he's gotten older, like a lot of filmmakers do, and they get more kind of conservative, I think it's lost a lot of that. I think that's one of the sparks that's missing. I don't think there's any of that grounding necessarily, and I find a lot of the kind of appeals to humanism to be a bit more perfunctory in this one. They just don't resonate.
Yeah, I think maybe because a lot of it is political machinations as well. It's a lot about people thinking at a high level about, the chess of politics. The only person that we've got a kind of real human connection to is the imposter himself, and him as he kind of settles into this role. And the film, although it largely follows him, it's not solely about him, and it is also about the son's concerns and the advisor, and we bounce around, and there's the kind of human interest drama is spread pretty thin, really, throughout the whole 3 hour running time. Which again, I think might be another reason why I'm a bit lukewarm on it, because I can't find too much to fault with it, but I have to admit I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would.
Yeah, I had the feeling watching it because it's 3 hours long, and I wasn't bored at any point by it. But at the same time as not being bored at any point by it, it doesn't have that kind of forward momentum and dynamism that a lot of his earlier films have either. Like, I wasn't on the edge of my seat for any of it either. Like, I could watch Seven Samurai again right now. Like, I love watching that film, and I'm always carried by it. Like, it just seems so like well paced, and I feel like this. I wouldn't say it's bloated, but I think there are extended sequences of people marching in front of sunsets and horses kicking in slow motion in the dirt and things that are a little bit indulgent as well, I think.
When I was watching it made me think of The Departed, in as much as you get a film from a major filmmaker that's better than their recent output, not as good as them at their peak, but it seems like it's the right time to
bust one of those out again. And also it's that return, because it's that kind of the kind of genre they were celebrated in as well, like the kind of crime film in the Scorsese case. And in this, after doing, his last films, I guess Redbeard would have been his last film, even remotely in this period, and that was not in this period. So his last period film was,
Sanjuro.
Yeah, I suppose so. So yeah, it is kind of him returning to his old stomping ground as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and maybe that's why it got. I don't know. Maybe that's why it got. And it's also the first one of those in color. George Lucas's name's attached as
Coppola as well.
Yeah, it's got. There's a load of hip young American filmmaking gunslingers trying to promoting this and kind of pushing people towards it. I can see why it would have been sort of culturally relevant amongst the cinephiles at the time. It just seems to me like it's a bit of a lesser work. It's not bad.
Sure. It's not. No, I think I think absolutely. It won the Palme d'Or as well, by the way, the year it came out. But yeah, it's it absolutely is that, and it does feel in the same way that Dursa Uzala, which is definitely another lesser work of his, I would say, won the Academy Award. It is that point of his career, isn't it, where you're starting to get. It's like I will
say for Dursu though, it sits apart as something that feels different.
Yeah.
Whereas this is a lesser version of something that maybe hasn't done an epic quite like this, but it does retread a lot of the beats and themes and look.
Yeah.
So Dersu is kind of Dersu for me. Dersu and the Descadenne, although they're both kind of, and I've warmed to the Descadenne since we watched it. Actually, it might actually be his best film. It's not. They both, I don't know if it's just because they're color and it's looking at like that, but they both just seem a little bit, they seem like outliers, and I do like an outlier. This doesn't.
Yeah.
It just, I don't know. It's like I say, it's not bad. It's just lesser.
I want to go through some more of my notes because there's some things I want to mention about the film. I really like, these are kind of stray observation criteria really here. Like, I really like the bit where it seems like the double is telling all the concubines that he is an imposter, just letting them all know that he's an imposter, and it ends up being taken as a joke and everyone starts laughing. And I really like the bit where Nakadai sort of like covers his face and just does a really over the top wink to the brother.
Oh yeah,
that entertained me. I really like as well, we talked about how the sniper reenactment thing was really procedural. And, I've seen lots of films from that show these kind of pitched battles, whether it's Barry Lyndon or, all kinds of movies that have these pitched warfare, these pitched battle situations. This is the most procedural one of them I've ever seen as well, because when you see the first big battle sequence, it's one where we stay with the general, the Lord, or the fake Lord. And men go off and do things, and they go, oh, there's people coming to the rear, send out the left flank, send out the right flank, go this way, go that way, cover this guy. But we all stay there in that spot where the orders are being given, and we see these people kind of peel off to go do their thing. But we're kind of in the hot seat of it, seeing kind of the decisions get made and the people get sent off in different places. And it's really interesting to be, I agree with you, like these scenes are not the strongest of the film. But it is interesting for me to see a battle from the point of view of this kind of procedural look at being the officer on the hill and never going outside of that. Like you might see maybe in like a film like Waterloo or whatever, you might see the troops fighting, and then you'll go on the hill and see someone in a tent going, send the 15th Cavalry or whatever. But you don't, you go and see the troops fighting again, right? You go and see the guy on the cannons, and you go and see the guys with their bayonets. But this doesn't do that at all. We see the people in his immediate entourage getting shot, but we never see the people who do the shooting. We see cavalry go off and charge to the side, and then they come back. So they've obviously done the job, but we never see what happened. And it's a really interesting sort of procedural little thing. Although I feel like it ties in a little bit to what you've said on previous episodes, where some of the stuff that's interesting that Kurosawa doesn't show, you might have actually appreciated seeing. But I do kind of, enjoy that. Another thing I want to mention, this is the last Takashi Shimura you get in any Kurosawa. Did you not spot him?
No.
He was. Do you remember when the one of the blokes sends the priests to go visit him, the kind of the foreign priests?
Yes.
Takashi Shimura is the bloke who takes the foreign priest to go see the double. He's the old bloke who accompanies the priest. And it's a very small role. And in fact, Shimura's role was completely cut out of the film on the international release until recently. It's been edited back in for the Criterion and all of that. So it's a really small role, but it's Shimura's last film role because Shimura died a couple of years later. He's got one more film credit after this, but it's a TV movie, so doesn't count. So this is his first this last proper film role, and it's so small. I mean, I hope kind of that the reason this is bad. I was going to say I hope the reason he's not in a bigger role is because of ill health. But why would I hope he's in ill health? I just like to think that Shimura wasn't out of favour.
He would have been 74 at the time, according to according to Wikipedia. So
anyway,
so let's hope he was really ill.
Let's hope he was in good health and he was just a bit semi-retired. But it was nice to see him. But you missed him, did you? You didn't spot him.
Didn't spot Shimura, no.
Didn't spot Shimura. But it is crazy. I've noted in the last in the last of his kind of black and white films, he was getting smaller and smaller roles, wasn't he? And you're kind of struggling to pick him out in some of them. And it does seem strange considering how important he is to the ones in the very early 50s. But anyway, just so I don't go on a sort of ramble of notes, are there any things you wanted to kind of stray observations and things you wanted
stray
to point
observations? Out? There were some when you started, that it did make me think about some other stuff I'd seen in the Wink. Oh, the No Theatre, I could do without that. I think I sent you a message when you mentioned it the other day saying, yeah, if that was me, I would have admitted, I would have confessed to being an imposter there and then. Yeah,
that's because I messaged you saying that having to watch No Theatre is clearly the worst part of being a Japanese lord, isn't it? Like,
Oh, there was one other thing actually when we're talking about the not really seeing anything. The kind of scenes where they're sat on the hill with the kind of the phosphorus and the lights and the flags. I thought it looked a lot like Glastonbury. Yeah, just the flags, the lights, the smoke. Yeah, I thought it looked like a music festival, but I mean that's not particularly insightful.
A scene I really want to mention, I think it might be the best scene in the whole film actually, is the one where he gets introduced by the brother to a bunch of dudes who are going to be his attendants, who are going to be around him at all times. He's always going to have these 5 attendants with him. They can't leave him alone, right? And are you laughing at the men in the cupboard? Yeah. You're probably laughing. There's just some men in a cupboard, aren't they, who are like his guards?
Yeah, that jumps back to Sanjuro, where there's always people in cupboards.
Always people in cupboards. But yeah, he's got some men in a cupboard, but he's got these 5 attendants who know his secret, and they're around him at all times. And basically, there's this really interesting, really well-acted scene where the brother leaves the room. The brother is a noble, obviously. He is the brother of the Lord. He is a noble. He leaves the room, and all these attendants who are assembled, they stop being formal, and they come out of their bows, and they kind of uncross their legs, and they kind of sit how they like, and they untuck everything, and they just start kind of chatting really casually with the imposter, because they know he's not really a lord, and they don't really respect him, I suppose, on that way. They don't see him as this high status person, and they tell him, well, you can't act this crass, you've got to act more like the Lord. And the imposter says something along the lines of, oh, like this, and he suddenly tries to inhabit the Lord, and he starts to try and do his mannerisms. He like pulls a little side table round, and he leans on it, and he looks very kind of stoic and serious, and whatever. And the men get back into their respectful posture, and one of them seems moved to tears. That's a really great scene that shows his transformation into the Lord in these people's eyes, and the way that he's so convincing to them that they now have the same respect and admiration for him as they did the Lord, like how much he's come to look at him. And it's all done in little gestures and ways people change their posture. I think it's a really beautiful sequence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's a very physical kind of, like you say, very physical storytelling in that scene. It shows a sort of attention to detail. It is a film with a lot of people sitting in rooms, sort of cross-legged, with kind of high stakes things going on. And like you say, although it's not the most compelling Kurosawa film that we've seen, and it is 3 hours long, it doesn't drag. It's just ultimately not that satisfying when you get to the end of it, I think.
What did you think of Nakadai? Because the reason I ask is that I really love him. I've seen him in loads of Kobayashi films. I've seen him in a couple of Naruse's as well. I like him in High and Low a lot. I like him in Yojimbo and Sanjuro. In the Donald Ritchie book, where he is very negative about Kagemusha, like he does not have really anything to say about Kagemusha.
We've not gone to Ritchie Corner yet.
Yeah, well, I've got some Ritchie here, but he talks about how there's terrible acting in the film, and he cites Nakadai as being a bad actor in the film, and he talks talks about Nakadai being because Nakadai's a theatre actor, and he talks about him being very theatrical. Now, I'm willing to give Richie the benefit of the doubt that Richie was a fluent Japanese speaker who lived in Japan and knew about Japanese theatre as well and things like that. So possibly him watching it, he's seeing a lot of things. Well, not even possibly, definitely him watching it. He's seeing things in the performance and things that we're not picking up on because we don't understand the language. But as a physical performance, his eyes, his gestures, his mannerisms, I think it's an amazing performance.
From a Western perspective, from a man who's lived in the south of England for his entire life, who doesn't speak a word of Japanese, I didn't notice it. But I would say that I think those sort of things. I think it's very, very difficult to spot bad acting in subtitled films, and if you're not familiar with sort of local sort of intonations and kind of ways of speaking, and I think because I don't know if you've seen many sort of Southeast Asian films where they bring in Western characters and they've got Western actors in small bit parts,
and they're always terrible.
Yeah. To the point where you just don't see, even if the film is great and everything else about it is fantastic, the kind of the Western actors in small bit parts are always shit. And I don't know if that is if it's masked, by translation and subtitles.
I never see those as a marker of the quality of the rest of the acting. I see that as that's probably when we watch an American film and there's some random French actor French people don't know who's speaking French. They're probably watching him going, "Who is this terrible actor?" But yeah, I appreciate that, and I think it is difficult to tell. But from my perspective, like, I really love his mannerisms in it. He is quite theatrical. Like, I can tell that he is a very big actor, but in the same way that Mifune is, because Richie praises Mifune and he talks about how Mifune would have been better in this role. But I see them very similar. Like, they're both able to do the kind of wild and crazy character. They're both able to kind of then be the Lord, they both do that kind of thing. So I really liked him in it, but hey, who am I? I'll give some context stuff about the film. So basically, since making Dersu Uzala and Dodeskadem prior to that, Kurosawa's fortunes in getting films bankrolled in Japan have not improved. He's unable to get funding for anything at this point. I think partly because he's a cantankerous bastard. Because reading between the lines, it's not that no one will fund him to do a film. It's that no one will fund the kind of films he wants to make. Seems to be the situation, because the films that he's going around trying to make are Kagemusha and Ran at this point. In the years since Dersu Uzala, he's written both of them. So Ran fully exists at this point in Kurosawa's mind as well. And these are the films that he's trying to get companies to make, and they're very, very expensive films. They're these huge productions. Japanese studios at this point are, as I said last time, I think, or maybe when we were talking about Dodeskadem, they've reacted to the coming of television the opposite way to Hollywood. Instead of going bigger, they've gone smaller, and they've just kind of said, well, if everyone's watching TV, let's just make smaller films with less money, just to be safe, because we're not going to risk anything. So he's struggling to get financing for these huge films. So what happens is he goes to Hollywood to get his Oscar for Dersu Uzala, and when he's there, he meets Lucas and Coppola, and they mention to him that they're big fans of his work, and they love all of his stuff. He's been very influential to them, and they ask him about what he's working on, and they meet him, and they have drinks with him, and they seem to get on well with him. And Kurosawa, they start to understand that Kurosawa is not able to make any movies. No one's bankrolling him. Lucas at this point, Coppola, because there's a documentary on the Criterion DVD where Lucas and Coppola, it's all interviews with them talking about their side of it. Coppola attributes the success in getting it made entirely to Lucas, because he says that because Lucas had just made Star Wars, 20th Century Fox would basically do anything for George Lucas at this point because they wanted to keep him on side. So basically, and Lucas says he went to Alan Ladd Jr., which I only mention who the producer at Fox was just because he's Alan Ladd's son, which is just weird. But he goes to Alan Ladd Jr. and he says, "Do me a favor." And the way Lucas puts it, Fox did it as a favor to him because of Star Wars, and they had no intention of making a profit on it. They didn't think it was going to do anything for them, but they just threw some money at it so it could get made. So Fox gave $1.5 million to it, and then because of that money, Toho then had the confidence to put up the rest of the money. So that was the way the relationship worked. Watching the little documentary about Lucas and Coppola with Kurosawa, they seem to have been around him a lot. Like, at least they seem to have visited him filming it a few times and have spent time with him. And Lucas very much seems to have seen it as this learning opportunity. Like, he talks about it a lot as being like, I wanted to see him working. Even a minor film by a great master there's going to be things to learn from it. And I wanted to see how he works. And he talks with great enthusiasm about watching Kurosawa shoot with multiple cameras and watching kind of how he does things. Coppola
that's interesting at a time that he's using it as a learning opportunity when it would be 19 years before he made another film.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought about that.
Directed another film.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry. And I thought about that when he said it, but then I thought, well, I'm always trying to watch films and learn about stuff about films, and I've never made any films, so I guess it's valid. Like, he can still be interested. But yeah, it is sort of a shame that he's he clearly got this interest and doesn't really direct anything after that until the prequels. So yeah, they talk about this. It's Coppola's quite sniffy about the film in these interviews. Like, there's a kind of a tacit admission, I think, for both of them that it's not the best Kurosawa film, and Coppola criticizes the casting as well of Nakadai as one of the things, because basically kind of in a very gentle way, he's not like slagging the film off, but basically the main production sort of famous production thing around this film is that the actor, is it Shintaro Katsu? I can't remember. I think it's Shintaro Katsu. Basically, he's an actor who's famous for the Zatoichi films. You might be familiar with Zatoichi because what's his name? Takashi Kitano did a remake, right? Where he played Zatoichi, but Zatoichi was
is it Lone Wolf and Cub as well?
I have no idea. I don't think so. It's just a blind swordsman. Lone Wolf and Cub, he's got a kid, right?
Yeah. I thought they were connected. I might be completely wrong. I've not seen
I don't think so. But Zatoichi, anyway, was this huge series, a bit like James Bond, I guess, where there's like 20 plus of these movies. And Katsu is the guy who plays Zatoichi in all these movies. And he was a big star in Japan at the time. He was also on Japanese TV a lot. And he was kind of a comic actor as well. And the film was originally envisaged to be more comic, and for the double character to be more comic, and there to be more comic elements to the performance, I suppose. And what happened was, and this is what Coppola didn't like, was that he thought Katsu, the whole film had been designed around Katsu being in it. It had been written with Katsu in mind, and Coppola thought Katsu was going to be perfect for the part, and then getting in an actor who was more controlled than Katsu, more, I guess, mannered and theatrical. Coppola, I think, felt that the film had kind of lost an opportunity to do something a bit more daring there, I think. But basically what happened with Katsu was that on the first day of filming, he turned up with his own film crew. And he just said, yeah, they're going to film me. They're going to film me the whole time, and they're going to film my acting. And Kurosawa said, no, they're not. They're not going to do that. That's not going to happen. And then Katsu said, yes, it is. That's definitely going to happen. I'm going to do it. And they had a big argument, the end of which was Katsu being fired or quitting, depending on who's telling the story. So basically, the first day of filming of this huge, very expensive production, everyone's there, the film crews, and everyone's in costume. One of the actors, actually, on another one of the documentaries on the Criterion disc, talks about this whole affair. And talks about being in the dressing room and seeing Katsu come back in his costume and start frantically taking everything off and throwing his wig down and all this. So they're all in costume. They're all ready to shoot. So Kurosawa fires Katsu. And then, that's sort of the big thing, is Nakadai was kind of a last-minute replacement on the film. during this period of time as well, because Kurosawa's hard up for money, he makes a load of Suntory whiskey commercials, and all of them are on the Criterion Blu-ray, and they're great. One of them, the narration says in most of them, it starts off with, for some reason, it's always Kurosawa and Coppola that are in these commercials, and the narration earnestly says, the world's gaze is fixed on these two men as on nobody else, as they make Kagemusha. You know, it's really over the top, right? It's talking about how they're making this film Kagemusha, and they're so like, the world's gaze is fixed on them. And then my favorite one of the adverts, it actually says, there is no friendship stronger than between these two men. Come on, guys. They're quite funny. So yeah, there were basically a whole load of production issues on this film, production disasters, as Ritchie kind of lists them out. He talks about how the DP for the film, Kazuo Miyagawa, he was his DP on Rashomon and on Yojimbo. He also worked on the kind of three of the biggest Mizoguchi films, Ugetsu, Sancho the Bailiff, and Streets of Shame, also on Ozu's Floating Weeds. He's also the DP on Kon Ichikawa's Tokyo Olympiad. So he's considered this legendary Japanese DP. He started production of the film, but then his eyes failed and he had to be replaced. Then Kurosawa fell out with his composer, who'd been his regular composer post Seven Samurai, when his previous composer had died of cancer. So he'd worked with the same guy since I Live in Fear, and they had a huge falling out, and so he got a different composer in. Then they started filming Nakadai fell off his horse and broke a load of ribs. They had a typhoon come in that halted production for a while, that was very expensive for the film. So there's just all of these things that go wrong, that sound almost a bit like Lost in La Mancha, like some sort of saga. But the film does get completed basically on time and more or less on budget, which is kind of a miracle for a Kurosawa film anyway, let alone with all of these issues that have happened to it. The other things I want to mention from the Ritchie, because they're excessive and a bit stupid, it says that I don't know how true this is, but this is what Donald Ritchie says. So Donald Ritchie might be exaggerating. What Donald Ritchie says is Kurosawa handpicked every last soldier from the auditions of thousands, that he was personally on hand to pick every single actor who played a soldier in the film. I can believe that's
apocryphal. Surely
that must be bollocks, but I can also believe it's true because of how obsessive and fanatically devoted to detail Kurosawa was. And there are loads of extras. When you watch these documentaries about the film, there are loads of behind-the-scenes bits where he's surrounded by extras and he's giving them all instructions and stuff. Like, he does seem... We know from stuff about his previous films how much attention he paid to details the audience would never see. That would be irrelevant. So I can imagine if anyone is on his screen doing anything, he has to go and tell them exactly how they need to be doing it, which I think is where the issues with Katsu as well stem, because Katsu was obviously wanted to do his own thing, and Kurosawa wanted someone he could tell exactly what he wanted them to do. That's pretty much my notes on this. It opened in Japan and made quite a lot of money. It made 10 million in Japan at the time, which was a fairly big deal. So it was a hit film. It's one of those that you do see in lists turning up for people do rate it often among his top sort of 5 to 10 films. And like I said, it won the Palme d'Or as well and was nominated for the Best Foreign Film Oscar. So it kind of had a good airing back in the day. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that as Forrest Gump would say. Okay. Do you have any other thoughts?
No, not really. No, I will say that you mentioned Alan Ladd Jr. and there's a recent documentary about him called Laddie that's worth watching. But yeah, no, it all sounds. I don't know. I guess I was expecting a little bit more from this, and there was not more to be had.
Has it coloured in any way what you're expecting from Ran, which is ostensibly quite a similar production, where he's written it during the same period, big colour epic, foreign financing, bring out the greatest hits, but the difference here is it's a Shakespeare adaptation, which I know is
the thing is, I'd heard of Ran before, and I know that Ran has a stronger reputation. So there is something missing in the alchemy of Kagemusha
Hmm.
that kind of holds it back and leaves, like I said, not leaves you kind of thinking it's bad, but just a little bit kind of, like I say, lacking. So I'm hoping that Ran is Kagemusha plus, plus with
Any other
Velocet.
sort of predictions as to what Ran will be like? You've seen Kurosawa do Shakespeare before. This one is King Lear.
I don't really know the story of King Lear beyond Three Daughters. I think I'm expecting something similar to what we've seen, basically. With lots of color. I'm hoping we'll get some gore and blood, because I've not seen much of it. And I don't know why I think I've seen it. Maybe I haven't. Maybe I've got a bit of a sort of a Mandela effect thing going on in my head, that I saw a supercut of some gushing blood in red, but maybe that never existed.
I think Ran might be slightly bloodier. We obviously have the blood in Throne of Blood. There's like that big bit on the wall, and then the bit in Sanjuro with that big torrent. But other than that, Kurosawa's films up to now are relatively bloodless, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it'll be that bloody. I mean, BFI's given it a 12. Just looking at their epic and bloody spectacle, there we go, is underscored by the somber mood of loss, regret, and morality, making Ram both enthralling and disturbing. The film is presented here in a stunning new restoration. Moderate bloody violence. So to me that sounds like OTT sprays of like a little bit of blood or something actually seeping is a bit too nasty. When it jets out like it's coming out of a super soaker, that's just funny. Ran can be seen as a culmination of the great Japanese director's filmmaking career, a late triumph which he planned and refined over several years.
So they've written off his last 3 films, as people often do. So before wrapping up, I'm not going to put up the chart anymore because it's become completely it's just too full of things at the top right end. So where would you roughly
nothing else is going there, I'd imagine. Maybe Ran.
Fair enough. Where would you sort of, in your mind's eye, put Kagemusha though? Is it another mid-pack entry, or is it slightly lower down?
I would put it more or less. It's slightly. I'd say there's been slight diminishing returns since Dedeskiden. So it's I've liked all those films in a kind of a mid-tier kind of way. And a mid-tier Kurosawa is stronger than normal mid-tier, but I like Dedeskiden because it's odd and offbeat, and Dursa Uzala was handsomely made. This just feels, because it is familiar ground, I think it's just a little bit less interesting than the others, but.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I think that's a fair enough way to end it off. Not in by any stretch of the imagination a bad film, probably quite a good film, but not one that lives up to the highs of Kurosawa's own previous work in the same genre, really. On it, for all the lovely color that's on it.
I think if we've I don't know if I think we've talked on this podcast. I know you've talked on your other podcast about Hipster's Choice. And like actually the best film is Redbeard or High and Low or whatever. I think if anybody says to you the best Kurosawa film is Kagemusha, they're talking absolute bollocks and they're just trying to be contrary. Yeah. I think that's the if someone says Redbeard, you'd suspect them being a contrarian, but you'd have to sort of suspect, much like the characters suspecting the imposter. You'd have to sort of like weigh that in your mind carefully. If they say Kagemusha, they're just talking out their arse.
You've seen the scar at that point, haven't you? They've been thrown from the horse. Well, on that note, we'll leave that. So in the next week or the next 2 weeks, depending on our schedules, we'll cover Ran. And it's only four films left to go now from this whole endeavor. I'm really looking forward to putting them all behind us, not to end this engagement, but because I'm really interested in also like going over your kind of overall thoughts on Kurosawa as well, and really getting into that. So we'll get into that territory soon. But until then, we've got Ran, Dreams, Rhapsody in August, and Madadeo to get through, with Ran coming up next time. So until then, thank you very much for listening. See you later.
See you later.